Hello, everybody, and welcome to the September 13th, 2022 iteration of the Kubernetes SIG-Windows community meeting. As always, these meetings are uploaded to YouTube so be sure to adhere to the CNCF Code of Conduct. For anybody new, that pretty much just boils down to be nice to everybody. Let's get started with the announcements. First announcement, well, only set of announcements is the 126 release schedule's been posted. These are subject to change sometimes, but here's kind of what we're looking at. First deadline is the production readiness review freeze, which is the Thursday 29th. That is like a little over 2.5 weeks from now. So for those, if anybody's new here, production readiness is one of the kind of approval processes that are needed for the Kubernetes enhancement proposals, and the goal of those is to make sure that the features are kind of ready for production, make sure that there's things like metrics added and that people have thought about what happens when you enable or disable features in a cluster, and things like that. Next important deadline is the enhancements freeze. That's the following, or that is that's the following Thursday. So that's October 6th, 2022. That's about 3.5 weeks away. And then code freezes at the end of November. Does anybody have any questions or anything else to announce here? Oh, one other thing that I'll announce is the Contributor Summit is still open for signup. So anybody who's a Kubernetes or Kubernetes SIGs org member and is planning on attending KubeCon in person, please sign up for that. That's a great way to meet fellow contributors, and there's usually some nice swag and some sessions kind of specific to developers versus what is at the main KubeCon. All right, does anybody else have anything to announce?
Hey, Mark, quick question. You had said code freeze is end of November, but I see here
it's October 6th. Oh no, code freeze is beginning of November.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was wanting to make sure either what you said was true or this is true, just clearing it up. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like it's November 8th.
Okay.
I think it's a week and a half after KubeCon then, to give people a little bit of time to finish things up. Yep, sorry about that. Okay, if there's no announcements, we can move on. Next is we can see if there's any new contributors on the call who would like to say hi or introduce themselves or say what they're working on. This is optional, but if anybody wants to, feel free to either raise your hand or just say hi. All right, next is the agenda. First agenda item that I had is they are taking call for proposals to speak at the Contributor Summit. And I was wondering if anybody had any interesting ideas about if anybody wanted to submit something for SIG-Windows. I don't know if maybe Amim or Shinchi, if you guys would like to go over the developer environment, something that might be good, and I think right up, like really kind of geared towards the spirit of the Contributor Summit.
When is the end of the call for papers?
It is September 30th. I was just looking. I think that the CFP, like the proposal process, is going to be much more streamlined compared to the actual KubeCon. I'll add a link. I had a link in a different tab, but I'll add a link afterwards, and I'll also ping you guys if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, I can send the for SIG-Windows dev tools, image builder and what it did.
I think that they're also encouraging each SIG to just submit a call for proposal for like a face-to-face meet for the developers who are in the area. I'll confirm and I will submit that one, and I have another one that I might submit about using GitHub projects for triaging things, since I've done a lot of work automating that. But yeah, I think that submission's open for everybody who's attending, so I'll probably mention it again next week. I mean, if you didn't do that. Next on the agenda, I was going to go over I was going to go over some of the enhancements that SIG-Windows is putting forward. If anybody has anything else they'd like to talk about before that, because this might take the rest of the meeting, feel free to suggest a topic. Actually, I do. One more thing. One thing, another thing that I'll mention here is I think there's been a lot of talks about it and mailing lists to like Kubernetes dev and things, but the release team is changing the way that enhancements are being tracked for this release. So we're instead of using a GitHub or a Google Sheet to track everything, they're using a GitHub projects board. I can do a quick demo of that too. There's a lot tighter integration into GitHub now, which is really nice. So for example, you can see, I'll open up this one since it's actually filled out. But you can go right to the GitHub issue, and then you can see all of the fields that are here. So you can actually check to see who like the PRR assignee is, if the PRR is done, if there's any like who to reach out to for docs issues, and verify that like this stage and everything is correct. So the enhancements part of the release team will be working on populating all of these, will be managing this GitHub project board going forward. So things are no longer being added as part of those old spreadsheets. If anybody has any questions about that, could ask me, or I think post in Slack, the release management page or channel in Slack. Okay, talking about enhancements, I'll go over a couple of the ones that I think are probably going to be pretty short discussions. The host process containers one, I think we're still planning on pushing for GA for this release. We have been running E2E tests using pre-release builds of container D, and do have pretty much all of the backwards compatibility for volume mounting working exactly as expected, which was one of the big concerns for going to GA. So I think we've got that covered, and other than that, I think we're just going to continue making progress on that. Mike Zappa said, yep, I posted in the chat, host process containers GA for 126. Yep, that's the plan. Next one is the kubectl log viewer. I'm hoping that we can get an alpha for this, Arvind.
Yeah, that's my hope too. I have pinged Jordan and Tim. I'll ping them again today on the PR, and hopefully they'll respond.
Okay, sounds good. Did anybody update the kep.yaml with the new milestones for 126?
I can do that. I can
okay.
do that.
And I did add the label that the leads were asked to add to have things show up on that board, and it did get sucked up. So
okay,
release team is tracking that, and I'll do that for the rest of these. Next set of keps. I think James added this to CRI pod stats. This is something that we're still pursuing. So SIG-Node is working on some changes so that this you can get all of the stats for pods from the container runtime over the CRI API. And there is a kind of naive or partial implementation for Linux, and we're hoping to have a Windows implementation of that too. And there's just been a lot of back and forth between what the shapes of those structures look like in there. Is there anything you'd like to add for that, James?
Yeah, we just need to get that support merged into CRI. I have a prototype API open in containerd that does the work. But yeah, so I think we're bringing it up at SIG-Node next week, or
this week
in 20 minutes. Hopefully get some resolution on that and be able to move forward.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please reach out to James or myself for that. Okay, the next ones are going to be a little bit interesting. This is a KEP that I just authored, It's for host network support for Windows. I have a PR open for the draft here, but basically the Windows, like we have the Windows operating system has all the functionality we need to support host network mode or to join the containers to the host's networking namespace, just like Linux. And you can set that in the pod spec and it doesn't do any validation. So this is a pretty straightforward KEP, but my thoughts are we should just try and support this properly for two main reasons. One is consistency, because it's confusing today if you set host network to true and they're Windows containers and they join the pod network, not the Windows network, or not the host network. And the other one is we have seen some cases where we think it can help with port exhaustion, because people can, or like users can set up some, in specific situations, people can set up workloads to use the nodes, port spaces and not create a lot of services in the cluster, which has been shown to lead to port exhaustion for the Windows nodes. This is a pretty straightforward change. It's just add in a couple of the CRI fields and populate them in the kubelet and then have containerd do the rest of the work. Does anybody have any questions around this? I don't know, maybe possibly David or Mike or Jay might have some comments.
Well, that sounds good. I mean, it's exciting. I know some people have asked for this.
Is this sort of, can we play with this now, or is this just a KEP?
This is just a KEP. The kubelet, when it's filling out a bunch of stuff for the run pod sandbox config, I think I linked to that here, will populate a bunch of these namespace options, including this namespace mode network. And it will set it to either pod or node. And then that gets passed over the CRI to cryo containerd or whatever. This only happens for, and then where I think I linked to the spot, the containerd code checks for that, but only if the Go OS for the running for containerd is Linux. So we can play around.
So it requires a containerd change.
Yeah. It
And
requires a containerd
okay.
change to look out for that, to look out for the settings on Windows. And then as part of the KEP, I'm just saying we should actually set the settings correctly in Windows structs. But we could experiment with the containerd changes before all of these other changes are done. So did I not link to? Thought I linked to the code where that gets set, but I'll have to double check. Did I? Maybe I did not. Are you interested in behaviors for this, James? Okay.
I'm not interested. I mean, I'm interested in. I'm not. I think this is great. I'm just. So I'm wondering, like, to play with it. It sounds like it's not that hard to. It sounds like it wouldn't be that hard to start prototyping it out. Someone makes the containerd change. Somebody puts some glue in the kubelet, and then we could start playing with this and see what we can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just interested from that perspective, because that's.
Well, this and then the host process containers opens the door for putting kube proxy in a pod as well, no longer as a Windows service.
Oh yeah, I should clarify that this is specifically for non-host process containers. Host process containers always get joined to the host's network namespace, so we can run kube proxy in.
Oh, fascinating! Cool.
Containers.
Thanks for the clarification.
Oh, okay.
I think I called that out in the goals or non-goals. But yeah, so this would enable the rest of Windows containers to.
So basically unprivileged, but on the host network.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's the use case of this, Mark?
The use case one is that right now one is consistency, and the other one is, I kind of mentioned this. I think, David, did you want to comment on that too? But basically on Windows, if you have a cluster with lots and lots of services in it, you can very quickly exhaust your available, like the ephemeral port ranges. And we've seen people want to just put some of their workloads on the host network to not create extra services for that, to help ease some of that port range exhaustion.
Cool.
What, like how many? So like how many? I mean, what, don't you have like 60,000 ports or something like on a, what are they doing with all these ports?
I don't, David, Mike, you want to come? I think some of it's
What?
kind of related to
What?
CNI, but some of it is,
Well, we
we've seen
Okay.
some very, very large clusters.
Yeah, well, there's some of them is like you only have like what 30,000 actual available ports, and David can correct me if I'm wrong, but like without the host network namespace, say if you have a a pod that needs to expose 30 or 40 ports, that is cluster wide usage. So now maximize that by a really large cluster where you keep doing that, you're going to run out, especially when you're doing NAT. You're going to eventually run into port translation, especially if you have long running or short living like TCP or UDP connections.
So this makes sense to me for this situation where you have an app that's binding to a whole bunch of different ports, and so for that reason you want to run it on the host network. Okay. And maybe you don't want to even define ahead of time what those ports are, because that would just be a disaster.
Yeah, well, that would
Yeah.
be with node port, and then if that's services, I mean, the pod is only
I
running
got
on
you.
2 nodes out of like 500. You don't get those ports on the rest of the cluster.
Yeah, you don't want to. Yeah, I got it. So you've got one really greedy app, and you just
Yes.
want to run it as a pet.
Yes.
It's a dog. It's not a cow, right? I got you. Go for it. Okay.
David, you unmuted. Did you have something too?
LGTM/approve.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna,
I think you went
go ahead.
over it
I think you
already.
might want to clarify that in the CAP, because I didn't understand that until you explained it to me. Like, there's one app that is like a video streaming app or whatever the hell kind of thing it is that's doing this, or an FTP server, or I don't know who uses 1,000 ports at once, but whatever it is, right?
Can you, yeah, actually, Michael or David, can you comment on the PR that I have open for that? I think you guys did a
Yeah.
much better job explaining that use case.
I have it open right now, so I can add it to the queue.
The other one is VMs, right? Like VMs, you want to do that, right? Like I remember we had this with port range for network policy, right? Like there's situations where you have a virtual machine that's running as a pod, and that thing needs to be able to just eat up the whole network, right?
Was
And
that
so
like KubeVirt?
Yeah, something like that. And so in that situation, you may want to have a network policy API that supports the port range. So you could say, I support this pod running with the network policy of ports from, this is a VM. So just open up all these ports for it, right? So the network policy
Yeah, but
working group, yeah.
yeah, but I don't think KubeVirt really supports Windows nodes for running.
Oh yeah, it's not, yeah. Yeah, it's not relevant to Windows nodes, but it was a similar argument that like when we tried to say there was pods that needed access to 1 million ports, people were like, what the hell are you talking about? And then somebody brought up KubeVirt, and suddenly it all made sense, right? Like, because
Yeah.
why else would you bind to 10,000 ports at once? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would look at this is it's not even, in my mind, this is a bug that Mark is trying to fix. Because today I can actually do this. I can actually say host network and it just doesn't do anything. In some
Right.
ways, this is, Mark is fixing a bug. He's doing the implementation to actually get this all working rather than it just, not working, but not letting people know that it's not
Yeah,
working.
but the fix to that bug is a lot easier than implementing the feature that's for school.
Sure,
This,
sure.
right?
Sure.
Yeah, this is filling in a validation, fixing a validation bug, and then filling in a feature gap.
Mhm.
You could just fix the validation if we didn't care about it, but it sounds like there's a good use case, so we might as well write it down.
The
Exactly.
other question I have, Mark, is do we need something on the container D side, like a, I don't know, whatever equivalent of a KEP they have there, or an issue at least?
They don't really have keps over there. I think that I kind of called out and said that those changes were out of scope. Where did I do that? Update container D. I did find exactly where it needs to happen. I think that just having a PR that references this and actually does all the wire up and then ED test is going to be sufficient for container D.
Okay.
Yeah, Danny and myself can help drive that effort. And who else is on the container D side? So yeah, because it's really just modifying the run pod sandbox call effectively to take the Windows, whatever type you just named it, whatever fields for the Windows side.
Mhm. And then
Yeah,
doing
I
all the
just-
HNS program or making sure you have everything set up right.
Yep.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, we have, so the use case here is there are some users that have, they're really relying on this feature called host port, kind of a CNI feature, which creates a NAT mapping from your pod to a port on the node itself. And some users are doing that like for a lot of different pods. And instead of relying on that NAT mapping, they would like to the host network mode for their workloads. And they were worried about having to, like the only way to do that is to launch host process containers, which they didn't want to necessarily have, the full functionality of host process containers, which is removing kind of the boundary of the process isolation. And yeah, regarding the natting, I think Zappa covered that. We have a lot of ports are reserved for outbound connections. The workloads that have many outbound connections, they will consume ports as well, ephemeral ports. And actually we have, by default for every pod, there's an outbound NAT policy, so that will reserve 64 ports as well from the node for outbound connectivity purposes. Yeah, there's a setting actually that is being exposed, at least in AKS, to remove that, the natting, the outbound natting for the pods. It's a little bit specific to AKS. I don't know if other providers are working on that, but that will reduce the consumption of ephemeral ports drastically, I think, for Windows nodes as well. So also something to keep in mind.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
And Mark, do we really need a feature gate for this?
I don't know. But since the work is kind of, I would say yes, because of its changes to the CRI API, and usually how that works is we have to put in the changes into the CRI API and then wait for the next release of Kubernetes for container D to vendor in the changes to the CRI API and then do the actual implementation.
Oh, I
And
see.
usually it's just like, even though it's more drawn out, anytime there's a CRI API change and we need to have container D consume those changes, I think it's automatically kind of
I see.
like
Yeah.
add the CRI changes and do the wire up in alpha while it's off by default, and then after there's a container D, like after there's some support in container D for it, then go to beta.
Yeah, maybe we should just call that out or something in the capital.
Mhm. I need to drop for SIG-Node to discuss this and some of the other keps, but I wanted to give a quick update on the WinDSR and Win overlay feature gates. So I was doing some spelunking And we have a WinDSR feature gate, which is still an alpha that was added in 1.14, and a Win overlay feature gate, which was added in 1.14 as alpha and went to beta in 1.20. And neither of these feature gates are tracked by a KEP. The initial PR kind of snuck in, and we need to work on progressing these features due to some of the recent changes about not having perma alpha or perma beta features in Kubernetes. So I was trying to figure out the best way of actually doing this, and I posted in SIG Architecture Slack, and they are saying what we should do here and what's been done before is basically you author a retroactive KEP that describes the current state of things in the design decision, or like the design. And it doesn't have to go in as much detail as some of the other KEPs because most of the decisions have already been made. But then use that KEP to track the graduation criteria or address any feedback that needs to be done and docs updates. So I think that since these are both Windows specific, I'll probably try and draft a KEP for that unless somebody else wants to do that. But I was going to bring this up at the SIG node meeting on this Thursday, or SIG network meeting on Thursday, to kind of give an FYI that this is what we want to do. Because I actually didn't even think that either one of this set of functionality was behind a feature gate until I was looking, and it is.
I can help with the KEP.
Okay, that would be great. But yeah, I think as far as I'm concerned, both of these are pretty stable. I know like every CAPZ cluster that we make sets both of these feature gates for kubeproxy. And I'm guessing any other CNI that's using overlay networking is setting these automatically and has been for a while. So there's that. I guess we'll report back next week on that. All right, everybody, I need to drop for SIG node. I'm gonna stop sharing and hand over to Jay.
Mike, if you're doing the, are you gonna help own that DSR KEP? If so, maybe if there's anything we need to add to the KP